everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys my mid-June reading wrap-up where I discuss all of the books that I have read in the month of June so far. I have, I think, about 11 books to talk about today. Some books that were just okay for me, and I have actually quite a few 5-star reads to talk about in this video, which is always really exciting. So without further ado, let's just get into it. I'm going to talk about the books that I liked the least and work my way up to my 5-star read. So the first book I'm going to discuss is Cowboy Come Home. This is by Carly Bloom. It is book 2 in her Once Upon a Time in Texas series. I read Big Bad Cowboy, which was book 1, and that was kind of based off of Little Red Riding Hood. Read that last month, really enjoyed it, gave it 4 stars. So I went into this one. Also, I want to say that I got an e-arc for this one off of NetGalley. So I went into this one thinking that I would enjoy it just as much as the first book, and unfortunately I did not. I gave this 2 stars. So this is essentially a second chance cowboy romance about Claire and Ford. Claire was the best friend of the main character in Big Bad Cowboy, so that's how the 2 stories connect. And this one I think was like very, very loosely kind of based on Cinderella. And man, was this a lackluster book. For one thing, it wasn't nearly as funny or entertaining as the first book in the series, and I just didn't really care all that much about the characters. They seemed kind of just meh and just basic white people in Texas. I don't know. I was just kind of waiting for the book to end by the time that I got to the end of the book. So yeah, I am settling on a 2 stars, which is pretty disappointing because, like I said, I was just hoping for so much more after reading the first book in this series. Next, I'm just gonna quickly mention some books that I already have reading vlogs out for. So I did reread the entire Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins. I reread this series for the very first time, and I did a binge reading vlog all about my experience and just discussing different things about this series. So if you want to check out that video, I will link it up in the cards above. I definitely had a lot of fun doing that reading vlog. So yeah, it was definitely a great experience rereading these. Gave them all 5 stars, so I don't think I need to say any more about these books. I did read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, which is the prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy. I also did a complete reading vlog / discussion video about this book where half of the video is spoiler free and the other half of the video is spoiler filled. So I definitely recommend checking out that video. I will also link it up in the cards above. I put a lot of work into it, and I'm actually pretty proud of how this came out. Even though it is a pretty long video, I tried my best to edit it down as much as possible, but there were just a lot of things to discuss with this book because it's like over 500 pages. There's a lot going on. For those of you that know nothing about this book, this is centering around Coriolanus Snow, who becomes President Snow in the original trilogy. This also takes place 64 years before the Hunger Games trilogy, so we are centering around the 10th annual Hunger Games, and Coriolanus Snow ends up being a mentor for the girl tribute from District 12, and the story goes on from there. But I gave this 3 stars. There were things that I liked, but there were definitely more cons than pros. Overall, I'm just not all that convinced that the story needed to be written or told. But yeah, if you want to check out more of my in-depth thoughts, definitely check out my discussion video. I also, I think, did a pretty fairly detailed review on Goodreads, and I always link my Goodreads in the description below, so definitely check that out as well if you're interested. Alright, so the next book that I want to discuss is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is a book that has been highly hyped on BookTube. I haven't seen anyone give this book less than 5 stars, so I definitely was going into this with pretty high expectations, and I'm gonna be upfront with you guys. I gave this 3.5 stars. I liked it, but I didn't love it. So, to tell you what this is about, this centers around Augustus and January. They were kind of rivals in college, but not really, and they end up kind of reuniting when January goes to stay in her father's old beach house. Her father had just passed away, and she's just learned that her father was cheating on her mother with a woman that also lives in this town where the beach house is. So she's grappling with all of that, and she's also trying to write another romance novel. So she is a romance / women's fiction author, and then Augustus is like a hard-hitting literary fiction writer. So the 2 of them reunite, and they decide to kind of switch genres. So Augustus Augustus is going to try to write a romance novel, and January writes a kind of literary fiction novel, but there's also a romance thrown in there, and the story goes on from there. What I did really enjoy about this was the overall premise and the overall plot. I had no problems with that. For me, I found it kind of difficult to emotionally connect with both January and Augustus. I could tell that Emily Henry was really trying to get me to connect with them and really trying to like punch me in the gut with some of the things that goes on in this book. But for whatever reason, it's gotta be something with Emily Henry's writing style that I just didn't connect with. I can definitely see why a lot of other people really connected with the story and gave it 5 stars, but for me, it was good, it just wasn't great, so I did settle on giving this 3.5 stars. Alright, so next I'm going to discuss a couple of historical romances that I've read in the past couple of weeks. So the first one is The Highwayman by Kerrigan Byrne. Kerrigan Byrne is a romance author that writes very dark and angsty historical romances. A lot of people in the romance community really love her historical romances, so I knew that I had to check out her books at some point, and this seems to be everyone's favorite. This is book 1 in her Victorian Rebels series, and I think at this point there's 7 books in that series. So this one, I don't know, it's kind of a complicated plot to describe to you, but basically we are centering around this woman Farah and this man Dorian. When they were children, they were both living in this orphanage. I think Farah was like 10 and Dorian was like 13, and they kind of fell in love with each other as children. They even got married, which was actually a really cute part of the story, but then unfortunately something really tragic happens to Farah, which ends up in Dorian and Farah being separated when they're children. And so then the story picks up 17 years later, and Dorian is now like a villain. He's definitely like kind of a king of the underground in London, and he's basically just seeking vengeance against the people that wronged him when he was a kid. And then Farah is working as a clerk for Scotland Yard, which is the police department. So they end up reuniting, but Farah doesn't actually know that Dorian is the love of her life from when they were kids. As when they were kids, he was known as Dugan, and he ended up going to prison and dying in prison and then becoming Dorian. So she doesn't know who he is, but he knows who she is. I really enjoyed this. I'm giving it 4 stars. I really like Kerrigan Byrne's writing style as well as Farah's character, but I was getting so frustrated with Dugan / Dorian's character. I understand that he is a very scarred person both inside and out, and his life has been a living hell his whole life basically, but I still don't think that that excuses his behavior towards Farah. There's some points where I feel like he's almost cruel to her, and at the end of the day, I don't feel like he ever grovels nearly enough to warrant her forgiveness. So that is my issue with this book, which is why I didn't give it 5 stars. Next, I'm going to talk about my 5-star reads. I actually have 4 to talk about, which is really exciting. So the other historical romance that I've read so far this month is The Prince of Broadway by Joanna Shupe. This is book 2 in her Uptown Girls series, which centers around these 3 sisters in New York City in the 1890s, I think, which is the Gilded Age. So I read the first book in this series called The Robe of Fifth Avenue, gave that one 4 stars. I really enjoyed that. But going into this one, I had a feeling that I was going to like it even more because the characters it was going to center around already interested me in that first book. So we are centering around Florence, and she is the middle sister of the 3, and this guy Clayton. So Clayton runs a casino, and Florence wants to actually open her own casino for women only. At this time in the United States, women were not allowed in casinos at all. They were only for men. So her dream was pretty scandalous at the time. And so she goes to Clayton to learn how to run a casino and all of that. And at the same time, they start falling in love, and I just had so much fun reading this book. I don't know, I just really loved the different situations that Joanna Shupe came up with to kind of put the 2 of these characters together. And the chemistry between Florence and Clay was just everything, and Joanna Shupe always does a great job of writing smut in her historical romances. So I think that this is one of my favorite historical romances of all time at this point. I honestly can't wait to reread this at some point. That's how much I loved it. And I also cannot wait to read the 3rd and final book of this series, which is called The Devil of Downtown. I actually already have an e-arc of that one, and it is coming out at the end of the month. So I need to go ahead and read that e-arc as soon as possible. Next book I want to discuss is one that I actually finished just last night, and that is The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. This is a standalone full-blown dark YA romance fantasy. That is a lot of words to describe a book, but this centers around this character, Alessandra, and this takes place in a very, like, typical kind of fantasy kingdom. And she is a very ruthless and cunning person, and at the very beginning of this book she talks about how she murdered the first love that she ever had because he essentially rejected her and she couldn't take that, and so she murdered him and buried his body. And nobody knows that she murdered this man, I think like 3 years before the book starts. And there is the king of this kingdom. He is known as the Shadow King because he literally has like shadows all over his body, and he seems to be the only one in this kingdom that has magical abilities. So I would definitely describe this as like a light fantasy because that is really the only fantastical element that I can think of in this story. So his name is Callias, and Alessandra wants to seduce him so that he will marry her, and then she can kill him and take over the kingdom for herself, essentially. So yeah, from page one, we know the kind of person that she is. I was just so entertained the entire time that I was reading this. I flew through this in like a day. This is definitely not like high art or like really amazing literature by any means, but it was just such a fun and, I don't know, just like delicious YA fantasy romance because Callias and Alessandra are literally made for each other. They are just that perfect for one another, and so that was a lot of fun to read about. There were also other things going on in the story. There's a lot of like kind of court intrigue and politics going on that I also really enjoyed. So if you're just looking for a fun YA romance, I would definitely recommend this book. Next, I want to quickly discuss that I read A Court of Wings and Ruin, which is book 3 in the A Court of Thorns and Roses trilogy by Sarah J. Maas. I did an entire reading vlog talking about my experience with this book, and it is completely spoiler free. So if you haven't read these books, definitely don't worry. I will link that up in the cards above when I post it. I think that video is supposed to go up on Saturday, so definitely be on the lookout for that. But yeah, I gave this 5 stars. For me, it held up pretty well to A Court of Mist and Fury, which is the second book. I know a lot of people were disappointed with some aspects of this book, but I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was paced well. I liked the direction that the story went in. So yeah, I don't really have any complaints, but definitely check out that reading vlog if you want to hear more of my detailed thoughts about this book. All right, and last but not least is a book that I literally just finished the audiobook for right before filming this video, and that is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. Elizabeth Acevedo has quickly become one of my all-time favorite YA authors. So she writes YA contemporaries. This book was written in verse, as was The Poet X, which is a book that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. That came out, I think, in 2018, and it was the National Book Award winner for YA fiction. She's also written With the Fire on High, which is not written in verse, but I really enjoyed that book as well. All right, so to give you a basic synopsis, this centers around Yahaira, who lives in New York City, and then we have Camino, who lives in the Dominican Republic. So both of their fathers end up dying in this plane crash. The flight was going from New York City to the Dominican Republic. While both of these girls are from very different backgrounds, they have a lot more in common than you might think. This book is essentially all about them dealing with that grief and also finding out secrets of their family. This was absolutely spectacular. Whenever Elizabeth Acevedo writes, especially in verse, I just feel like her writing style is just made for that. Although I did, like I said, I really enjoyed With the Fire on High. Something about her writing in verse is just on a completely different level. Also, I want to mention that she narrates all of her audiobooks, so I definitely wholeheartedly would recommend listening to this on audio as well as With the Fire on High and The Poet X. I do not think that you will be disappointed. Also, I want to point out that she based and dedicated this story to the people that lost their lives in Flight 587, which was a flight that crashed leaving New York going to the Dominican Republic. But the reason why we don't know about it is because this flight occurred in November of 2001, and because it took place just a couple of months after 9/11 and it wasn't a result of terrorism, the media just kind of covered it up. So I definitely didn't know about this, but I think about 260 people died because of this plane crash. So I'm just really grateful that Elizabeth Acevedo not only brought that story to light, but I think that this is just a stunning book. I loved all of the characters. There's also some really great LGBTQ plus representation. So if you're looking for a book to read for the Juneteenth Queer Blackathon that's happening this coming weekend, I think, because yes, Juneteenth is this coming weekend. So if you're looking for a book to read for that, I wholeheartedly recommend this. Could not give it less than 5 stars, and I cannot wait to see what Elizabeth Acevedo comes out with next. Alright guys, that's going to be it for my June mid-month wrap-up. I hope that you guys enjoyed. I would also love it if you would consider pushing that like button and subscribing, and I thank you in advance if you do. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!